Now more than ever before, leaders are under increasing pressure. They face many demands. They need to be on 24/7, 365 days of the year. They need to be always available. Under this pressure, what happens is that leaders often command and control. There's a fast pace, there are lots of demands, they're under great pressure, so they respond in the same kind of way. Unfortunately, that response often backfires for leaders, and rather than increasing the pace of work and increasing the quality of work, getting more done, the opposite happens. Leaders burn out. People find it very hard to engage in that kind of climate, and they also don't engage with the leader and don't get the results that they need to get. There's a case of Amy that I'd like to tell you about. So Amy and I were coaching together. She had had a recent example of a very successful engagement at work. She's head of security at an organisation, and they were dealing with an internal fraud investigation, which they'd resolved, as she thought, quite well. However, what happened was that the human resources people came to her and said, actually, there's some fallout. We need to meet with you, and we need to meet with you quite urgently to deal with this issue. So when Amy and I spoke, her first response was to defend her people, to jump in, to find the answer, to find the solution, to fix things. When we sat back a bit and thought about what's going on, what's the result that you really want here? How do you need to engage? We came up with a very different response. She'd decided to act very differently in that circumstance. For one, she had a great regional manager who had managed the process, and he'd done that very well. So it made sense that he was delegated with the response back to HR. Amy, her usual response was to jump in, to defend and to protect. But she was able to see that what that was doing was just continuing to respond, continuing to focus on the command and control context, and it wasn't allowing her regional manager or herself to develop. So by taking a different approach, instead of jumping in, fixing the problem, going straight to control, what she did was to put on a coaching cap, and she decided instead that she would take this coaching stance. And that made a big difference. Even though she went back to HR and said, we're going to do this differently, they were happy with that. Her regional manager and her relationship has improved dramatically because he was entrusted to do the work. He was delegated to fix up the fallout from this particular instance. And so my proposition is that when leaders coach, they engage people more work gets done, and they relieve the pressure on both themselves and the team. It kind of makes sense often that you would step into a command role, a control role. And while a lot of organisations say that they want a coaching culture, something like 80% do, they don't really set up the context for that to happen. They expect the quick response, they expect the fix-it. What happens though is that shuts down the opportunity for people's development. It diverts people from raising issues that might have an impact on the organisation. They might be safety issues, they might just be about how to do work better, and they certainly shut down innovation. Instead, coaching reverses that. Instead of leaders needing to say, I've got the answer, I've got the solution, I can respond immediately. They don't need to do that because it's not necessarily a crisis. You need to do that when there's a crisis. But it doesn't necessarily get the right result. You feel like you've got the job done, but maybe it's the job right now, not necessarily the job you need to do tomorrow and the next day and the next week. It's hard for leaders to avoid this because they're caught into the whole power and status game. We expect leaders to demonstrate power, we expect leaders to hold status, and we expect leaders to get in, to be authoritative. And so sometimes we confuse that in the moment with commanding and controlling. So adding coaching and making coaching a significant part of the repertoire can actually better achieve the outcomes that leaders need to achieve. It helps people to solve their own problems and to solve them on an ongoing basis. It helps people to grow and to develop. They're having to come up with solutions. They're having to stretch their thinking beyond what they currently know. And it helps people to achieve their own aspirations for their own careers and for the way that they do their work. So why should leaders coach? Leaders should coach because they can get more done that they need done. They can feel better about it, feel more resilient, feel less pressure. If they can shift the way they respond to the 24/7 climate that they're operating in, avoid commanding and controlling, and instead coach, they will be able to achieve more of their aspirations for leadership.